Hi, my name is Cohen Ambrose. I'm a tutor with the Theater Studies online program at Bruford College. And today I'm going to be recording this presentation, this interactive presentation about developing a self-reflective practice. We're going to be looking at some theory and as well as some practical tools for reflecting on your learning as a student, your research as a student and as a scholar, and on your theater making practice. So the aims of this workshop are really to define some key terminology centered around this idea of reflection, to analyze some theory behind reflective practices, justify this practice, to think about how this practice is not just for your work as a student, but for your work as an artist, and how it can be useful. So we're going to be thinking about a concept of the artist scholar or the practitioner researcher, this hybrid identity where you are both an artist and a researcher. We're going to look at, think about some examples, adapt some tools for reflective practice, and then I'm actually going to send you off with a link where you can download a template for using a specific tool to engage in reflective practice. So really overall, what we're going to be doing is looking at the what of reflection, like what is critical self-reflection, the so what, right? Why is it important, and all the varying reasons for why we might do some of this stuff. And then the now what, right? How do I actually do this, okay? So I'm going to ask you to pause this video and encourage you to visit this website, which is ztings.com/reflection /001-9511-0004. So just take a few minutes and type that into your web browser address bar, and then you can engage in what will look like this. An interactive version of this presentation, which you can follow along with if you like, or you can just come back to the video and watch the video. But I wanted to share with you, give you the option to participate and share with you the responses to some of these interactive questions that we got when we did this in a live study skills session. So the first question that I ask, and I encourage you to answer this as well, is very simple. Do you keep a personal journal, a diary, or blog, or any kind of other reflective log of any kind at all? And as you can see, out of nearly 30 people who responded in the live version of the session, a third of them said yes, a little over a third of them said no, and a third of them said sometimes. The next question I asked was, beyond any course requirements, do you ever journal or otherwise reflect on your learning as a student? And again, we got a similar kind of split, but most, nearly half of the respondents said they did not do that. In your studies at RBC, you're asked to do a lot of reflection. And so it's understandable, I suppose, that you're not doing above and beyond that. But I'm going to propose that you try to keep a regular log of your learning. So this one was more of a free-form response. And again, I encourage you to do this before you look at all of these responses, so that you can just have your own responses. But I asked, in less than 3 words, define self-reflection. And there's no right answer. This isn't a trick question. And I thought it was important, or I thought it was interesting what everybody else had to say. People said, how I think, recapping, what I can do for future improvement, actions versus inner processes, thinking, talking, looking, which is kind of fun, thinking about all the different senses, an inside-out process. taking stock. This one's specific, mindful situational awareness. A few people just said why. Summarizing, consolidating, and evaluating. That's very specific and I think a helpful way of thinking about self-reflection. Self-criticizing. And again, we're going to talk about critical thinking or criticism, but not in the negative sense that we tend to carry that in our everyday understanding of the word critical. Doesn't necessarily mean a negative thing. Evaluating, analysis, etc. So you can take a look at these, pause the video, take a look at these or look at these on that link I gave you. They also said in my answer to my question, in less than 5 words, write what you think your tutors want when they ask you to reflect more. So people said lots of things. Expand on the what and why. Yeah, absolutely. Expanding on what you're doing and why you're doing it the way you're doing it. Checking on your own progress. Okay, sure. Going beyond the study material, definitely. A lot of what you're being assessed on, especially at the higher levels, if you're working at a high level, is to go above and beyond what's being asked of you in the coursework or reflective journal tasks or in the assignment prompts, and contribute new knowledge to what you find in your research. So going beyond just what's being given to you, especially in your reflective work, this is where you can really take advantage of adding ideas to what you're being challenged with. Yeah, awareness of your performance levels, critical and analytical thought, how I can better my work, highlighting the purpose of the work. I think that's a helpful one. This idea of in your reflections, highlighting this is why I'm being asked to do what I'm asked to do, and this is why I chose to do what I've done. Even if the answer is, I don't really know, but here are some thoughts I have. Discovering different angles, etc. Okay, great. So I'm gonna pop back over here. Great. So, what is reflective practice? So there's no right answer. This is just from some of the research that's been published on reflective practices. This is a great article from 2008 by Finlay, who sort of consolidates a lot of the thinking and research on reflection and reflective practices kind of over the last 30, 40 years. And she writes that reflective practice is consciously reviewing, describing, analyzing, and evaluating past practice. So I the key word there is consciously, like really thinking about what you have done in the past in order to gain insight and improve your future practices. So that's a real concrete, sort of straightforward, maybe more traditional way of thinking about reflective practices. Consciously thinking about what I've done with the view of improving what I do in the future. That's one way of thinking about it. She also talks about this idea of reflective practice being a process to learn from and through experiences en route to acquisition of new understandings and perceptions for practice. So a little bit more of a fluid definition here, thinking about learning from experiences as you're inside of them. So maybe a bit more of reflecting in the moment, or what I call, and what another researcher calls reflection in action, sort of reflecting in the moment and learning from those experiences and developing understandings and perceptions. In the upper right-hand corner, Bowd and a number of other researchers have written a lot about reflective practice, and they define reflective practice as learning through and from experience and gaining new insights of self and or practice. So similar definition to Finlay's, but uh, uh, some of what the aim is to also gain insights about how you operate as a person, and as an individual, and as a thinking, feeling, creative human, as well, and intellectual, uh, and not just as a student or as a learner. So really thinking about yourself as a holistic entity through this reflective process. And then for those of you on the theater studies online course, or the theater studies courses, various theater studies courses at RBC, you'll see, hopefully you'll receive the approaching your coursework portfolio and reflective journal guidance document that you should get at your induction to the program. And in that document, written by Jane Richards and some others, I believe, they define reflective practice as probing deeper into not simply information acquired, but in how it was learned and what it caused you to discover as a result, right? So this is really about reflection on learning, really going deeper into what you learned, as well as how you learned it, and then most importantly, what it caused you to discover as a result. And that's where you have to get really creative and thoughtful about kind of your reflections on what the key takeaways are for you from a learning experience. So what is metacognition? All right, we're going to explore some possible definitions, but metacognition is usually defined as thinking about your own thinking. Okay, and the science of metacognition, the neuroscience of metacognition, is understood as a bit of a cycle, and it's a process of moving through different parts of your brain, from the prefrontal cortex, that very human, self-aware, self-conscious part of the brain, back into the memory areas of the brain, and even the kind of very basic reptilian emotion-centered part of the brain. And it starts with this idea of assessing a task, right? Number one here at the top, a project or an event. I like to refer to them as events, but these tasks could be a coursework task, an assignment, a rehearsal process, a single rehearsal, reading a play, writing a scene or a play. It could be anything as long as it's defined. So this is reflection before action. So assessing the task. Then evaluating your strengths and weaknesses. Okay, what am I really good at as I step into this task or event, and what do I struggle with that I need to be aware of? Then 3, planning, right? Planning an approach. How am I going to do this? When am I going to do this? And really thinking about how you're going to tackle this task, not just launching into it without any thought beforehand, but actually putting some conscious thought into your ideas. And then as you go about the process, number 4, applying strategies and feedback that you've received in the past. So what are some strategies you've learned, some skills that you've learned, and also what's some feedback that you've gotten in the past? So going back to, say, some formative assessment or some notes or feedback that you've received in tutorials or other settings, and going, okay, how am I going to apply these ideas that I've been given in the past consciously as I go through this? And then after completing the event, reflecting upon the action or reflection after the event is really something we're going to talk a lot about. And it's this idea of asking yourself a series of questions about your experience and answering those questions in any format. Could be writing, could be a vlog, it could be whatever you decide. So reflection is only one, this reflection on the experience, on the event, is only one step in this cycle. So it's important to really think about engaging in reflection before we do a thing, while we do a thing, as well as after we do a thing. Okay, so what I've noticed, certainly with theater studies online students, is they find themselves banging away through their coursework and reflective journal tasks as they're laid out in the units. They go way into it, they get into it, they do a really good job, they present it really nicely, and then they go, oh shoot, now I have to reflect on it. I have no idea what I did, right? And it's that pre-reflection that I think really helps set you up for success in that post-event reflection, okay? So it's a full cycle, reflection before action, reflection in action, and reflecting on action, as in after the fact, okay? Let's see. I'm gonna go back to here. So I asked this question of the group in the live session, where I said, metacognition is usually defined as thinking about thinking. What do you think it actually means? And here are some things I said: looking deeper at why you are asking, what you're asking and why. A way to squeeze more knowledge out of an experience, telling a story of the learning. I loved that. Understanding the thought process of how conclusions are arrived at. Having an awareness of what you're thinking. Awareness, being conscious of what you're thinking, why you're thinking it. Consciousness of your thinking patterns and how you arrive at a conclusion. The process of thinking, yeah. Metacognition is quite uniquely human as far as we know, and it requires self-consciousness, which is the hard problem of neuroscience, is how do we, what is the physical makeup of this idea that I know that I am myself and that I can think about my own thinking. That's called self-consciousness. So that's why I think people keep bringing up this word conscious or consciousness, looking deeper at what you're asking, actively considering your thoughts, right? So there's some really good ideas that people had here. So maybe think about defining your own version of metacognition. So to go into another key definition here, terminology, I want to look at 3 different ways of thinking about the term reflection. Okay, so what is reflection? Well, on the one hand, reflection is thinking about something before, during, and after an event. That's great. Like we're just thinking about it, just going, what am I going to do? What skills do I have, right? The metacognition cycle. What strategies am I going to apply? How am I going to go about it? And then doing the thing and reflecting upon it afterward. So that's really just thinking about the thing. What happened? What did I get out of it? Isn't that great? Okay. Now, if you remember that definition from that Theater Studies Online guiding document, we're trying to go beyond just thinking about what happened and what skills were learned, but into something a bit deeper. So thinking about this idea of critical reflection. But before we look at critical reflection, let's think about critical self-reflection, which is kind of on the other end of this continuum, which is this immediate dynamic process of critical reflection that involves self-awareness. So this is going as far as you possibly can, where you are reflecting on your work as a student, as a scholar, as an artist, all the time, in the moment, right? Reflection in action, stopping yourself at various moments and tapping into your intuitive experience. Is this working? Why is this working? Even just in daily life, it can be a really deep self-awareness of a moment in a relationship with a friend or significant other, like really tapping into their experience, how you're responding to that experience. Critical self-reflection is it's those moments where you can visualize sort of floating up out of your body and watching yourself from outside of yourself and really critically analyzing how and why you're doing the things you're doing, how and why you're making the choices that you're making, right? And often that takes writing it down, talking into your phone. I find for me, talking to someone else that I really trust, like a therapist, or most of the time my partner. This is a practice that takes a lifetime to develop and practice. Meditation, these types of practices get us to this dynamic process of really reflecting on our work, but also the human inside the work. Okay, so this is where the critical self-reflection gets quite personal. What we're aiming for in your work as a student, certainly, but definitely as well as a scholar and as an artist, is somewhere in the middle that I just call critical reflection, thinking about something with a greater complexity within social and political contexts. Okay, so what the heck does that mean? Before I try to define that, let's see what others said from the live version of the course. What do you think it means to reflect on your artistic and academic work within social and political contexts? So these were, let's see if we can get them. Here they are. Okay, to be aware of yourself, contextualizing the artistic and academic choices you have made and why in terms of your background. Interesting. My responses are based on my experiences or situations. Understanding the processes, the due diligence, thinking about my life experience, what I stand for, what influences my thought processes, looking at who I am and why I have reached the conclusions I've reached. In the context of societal and political happenings and expectations, okay? It might give a potential understanding of the output, how it might be done, what does it mean? Okay, interesting. What external factors influence my decisions? Okay, so what contextual information am I getting from the world that's influencing how and why I do things? How my privilege, identity, and life experiences affect my work and opinions. So that's really, really insightful idea, the idea of how my, potentially my identity gives me privilege, and therefore how that affects my assumptions and opinions about ideas. Drawing upon the world around us, contextualizing. My responses are based on my experiences, understanding processes, draw your practice from real life stories, experiences, worlds. Good, and there's another one in here, I think about politics as well. One of my political, how does the political context in which I am, in which I operate, or from which maybe I benefit or do not benefit, affect my experience. Those are also really insightful um, ideas. And I think this idea of critical reflection is not just thinking about how we're doing what we're doing, why we're doing what we're doing the way that we're doing it, but then taking that next deeper step and saying, okay, well, what are some of the social and political, or here's a fun word, socio-political, uh, contextual reasons for maybe why I'm doing the things I'm doing. And this is getting close to critical self-reflection too, because you're having to ask yourself some personal questions. Or maybe I made that choice to respond to that coursework task in the way that I did because of my cultural perspective that is maybe biased in these ways, right? We always have to take into account our contextual, the frames, the lenses through which we're looking and analyzing an event or a process. We all wear different tinted glasses. Okay. One thing I'll just finish about critical reflection. And this is a quote from Fuchs, 2006. Once individuals become aware of the hidden power of ideas that they have absorbed unwittingly from their social, and I would say political contexts, they are then freed to make choices on their own terms. Okay, so becoming consciously aware through reflection of our socio-political contexts and the ideas that we've absorbed unwittingly or unconsciously through those socio-political contexts, then we are free to make choices that maybe we didn't know were available to us or that we've never thought of before. So this brings me to this idea of the artist scholar. We can consider the artist as a researcher and the researcher as an artist. Artists of all disciplines are commenting on the world in which they live one way or another. And so they're drawing upon information outside sources, which is what research is, right? Scholars do that in a very particular, concentrated and systematic way. And what we're trying to encourage you to do as artists is to think in that more kind of concentrated, systematic, conscious process and bring that over into your artistic practice. So think about this idea of the artist scholar. The artist reflects on artistic and creative activities primarily. A scholar reflects on research, scholarly, or academic processes. Now, the artist scholar is constantly engaging in something that in the performing arts, and in other disciplines as well, we refer to as practice as research. So creative practice is a form of research. It's primary research, right? The work that you are doing is a research process, right? And so everything that you do within that process, you can use your reflections, any documentary material you generate that are your reflections on your creative practice, you can then use in your scholarship, right? You can keep a journal through a rehearsal process. That journal or that diary, whether it's written, recorded, etc., becomes a primary resource upon which you can draw to support your conclusions in your scholarship. Some really fun questions that artist scholars or practitioner researchers can ask themselves. And I borrowed this from a book on reflective practices in the creative industries by Linda Candy. She asks these questions that I think are really helpful. What frames of reference do artists use to think about the works they make? What do they say to themselves about whether they like what they see once the making process is done? What kinds of things are they looking for? Do they have explicit criteria or standards to judge their works? When appraisal takes place, right, when analysis of one's own creative work takes place, does it involve asking questions about whether the work has qualities that are pleasing or satisfying or challenging? So these are some useful questions, I think, to rewind and maybe write down and think about for yourself as a practitioner, as an artist. In theater and performance studies, most of us are practitioners as well as scholars, not always, but most of us. So we often document and collect and organize and evaluate, share or otherwise disseminate in publication or at conferences our own critical research about our performance work and practices. And this is called practice as research. Sometimes it's called performance as research. Sometimes it's called practice research, practice-based research, practice-led research, etc. Really effective practice as research documents document the artist, scholar's pre-production research, thinking, goal setting, and planning, right? What theoretical or contextual concepts or dramatic questions or ideas they might be trying to answer or probe or problematize in their creative work. Their creative practices and processes, how they're probing and problematizing those contextual concepts or dramatic questions or ideas, and then reflections and conclusions to those answers through further questions, theoretical complications, etc., that emerged from their processes. They can also, artists, scholars often also poll audiences afterwards. They hold talkbacks. They have discussions with audiences. All of that can become primary research materials. And all of this is critical self-reflection. It's metacognition, and it plays a role in the artist scholar's primary research collection, documentation, evaluation, and curation of all of those materials. And that continually feeds back through loops throughout their process, not just afterwards. Another thought from an article that I read from fiber artist, so a visual artist who's a Finnish artist called Nim Kurat, is in the references page at the end, writes that the aim of collecting this documentation is to make the creative process somewhat transparent by capturing each step the practitioner, researcher, or the artist scholar takes in the process, both consciously and unconsciously. So there we have those terms again coming back up. Okay, so why is self-reflective practice as a student, an artist, scholar so important? So I'd like you to go to the interactive version of the slideshow and answer this question for yourself. So maybe do that before you watch this next section. But here are some things that the folks in the live session said. To look back and see what worked well, capturing and questioning the journey, improve, progress upon, and see a rear view mirror of where they came from. Keep growing and improving. Be aware and understand how I work and discover. To be sure I'm on the right track. Help me learn how to grow through practice, to progress, etc. So you kind of get the idea here. But there are all these different reasons: self-awareness, developing intuition, revealing and challenging your own assumptions, critical thinking, we always hear that, revealing bias and prejudice, right? That's similar to revealing and challenging assumptions. But reflection will ideally, if we're reflecting critically and considering our socio-political context, then hopefully we will begin to understand what sort of prejudice and bias and assumptions that we have or that we've been making throughout and in our work as artists and scholars, and hopefully also as people. Self-expression. So what does a reflective practice actually look like? So I've mentioned all three of these throughout. So here in the middle, we have this idea of the event, right? This is the creative, artistic activity, or as a student or scholar, scholarly or academic process, okay? Whatever it might be. Rehearsal process or a research process. Reflection before action is that assessment, evaluation, and planning stage, right? Making detailed schedules, planning rehearsals, making a time management plan for coursework or research, making notes on how to approach a coursework or reflective journal task or assignment. Asking yourself questions about assumptions you might have about a task or an assignment or upcoming creative process. Or using what I call a self-questioning ask system, which is sort of like frequently asked questions to prepare. And that's what we're going to focus on at the end of the video. That next stage, reflection in action, so thinking while doing, right? Now this one's tricky, but what could that look like? How can you reflect on what you're doing while you're doing it? Well, it might look like keeping a rehearsal journal and making entries while you're in rehearsal. So every hour you step out, or every time you have a break, you step out and you make those entries. Maybe you write them, maybe you record them into the phone, maybe you take little selfie videos. Developing and keeping a research materials curation table or a matrix, right? So if you're doing research as a student or as a scholar, and you've got a table where you're organizing consciously all of your research materials and evaluating them, which is something you're asked to do and you're assessed on in your coursework at Rose Bruford. Keeping a video or audio journal of intuitive and emotion-based responses to a rehearsal or performance development process. Pausing every 20 or 30 minutes to do gut checks, what I call gut checks while directing. As a director, this is something that I try to do as much as I can, especially when things just aren't quite feeling right. Going, hey everybody, I need 2 minutes. Take a drink of water so that I can just tune in and see what wants to happen next. Pausing frequently in a devising process to process intuitive reflections on the work. So as groups sitting down and processing our work. Reflection on action, so thinking after the fact, what one practitioner researcher said about their work. They called it the retroactive gaze, looking back at their work. So again, using documentary self-questioning ask systems, we're going to take a look at. Taking photographs or videos of the work you've created and then annotating them in the reflective process. Creating a vlog or audio diary, making mind maps of how you accomplished or didn't accomplish your academic or research goals for that study session. Okay. So we're going to look at this idea of using what in some research is called ask systems, or kind of like frequently asked questions on websites. Having a series of questions for yourself that you can ask yourself before action, in action, or on action, So that's the type of documentary self-questioning, okay? You also have to determine what form it's going to take, that self-questioning. Are you going to write it? Are you going to make a video? Are you going to make audio recordings? Are you going to take photos? Is it going to be more interpretive or abstract in reflection, which it can be? And is it a creative artistic activity, or is it scholarly academic activity, or a mixture of both? Okay, so these are the kind of three things we have to determine as we go into documentary self-questioning. So this is where you can find a document where I've created a template for you to start to work with. I want you to make this template your own. So what you can do is you can visit bit.ly/39RTDN0. Okay, you can visit that link, or with your phone, you can scan this QR code, and those will both bring you to a document that looks like this. So what I've done is I've just created based on some of the theory that's already out there, I've taken some questions and some models of ask systems and various other ways of using self-questioning as a form of reflection. I've adapted those questions, and I've just made a version that made sense to me, okay? And I put it in a table so that you can kind of do it with whatever you want with it. I've left 2 columns for you to write your answers down. And so I've broken this into 2 sections. Self-questioning for scholarly research or academic processes, and my preview is not wanting to appear, but I'll come back. And self-questioning for creative activities. Now you're going to have access to this document, so you should just download it and review it yourself. But what I suggest you do is think of a recent or ongoing event, a creative, artistic activity, maybe a scene, production, a play that you're writing, etc., or a scholarly or academic process, a coursework task, a final assignment, your individual research project, etc. Follow the link or scan the code and open up this document, download it so that you can edit it for yourself. This is a Word document, and play with it. So here's some ideas for reflection before action, right? Approaching a process. What is the task asking me to do? Before I begin, what questions do I need to ask about the materials, right? Sources, readings, videos, media, any of the materials that are associated with the task. What are my goals as I approach this task? What do I hope to demonstrate? What competencies do I hope to demonstrate? How can I motivate myself? What do I actually care about in this task, if anything? What technical or practical competencies is this task asking me to practice? Technical and practical meaning, like, am I supposed to do anything with the technology? Am I supposed to take videos? Am I supposed to include a link? Am I supposed to hyperlink an image, right? Practical, how is it actually supposed to be presented? Do I know at all? Or is it leaving it up to me? What intellectual competencies or skills is this asking me to practice? Is it asking me to contextualize? Is it asking me to compare and contrast? Is it asking me to find other research materials? Is it asking me to reflect? Is it asking me to evaluate? What intellectual skills is it asking me to practice? Or you could choose a creative or artistic activity, right? And these are some questions. Reflection in action, right? Considering the activity while you're in it. Stopping yourself and saying, what's happening? Literally just describe what's happening in the moment. Is what's happening in the moment working? Why is it working? For whom is it working? How am I feeling, right? Emotions are information, right? Why am I feeling so anxious? Or why am I feeling so angry? That can lead us to intellectual, like dynamic, intellectual, critical self-reflection. If we start with the feeling, and then as long as you move on to reflecting on why the feeling and really describing the feeling, then you're doing that reflection. Okay? And there's more and more questions there. On the right-hand side, we're looking at reflecting on action, right, upon completion of the process. So in that first column, these questions, your answers to these questions, that's your plan going forward. Over here, your reflection on your work is based on, that's after the fact, right? What have I accomplished? How good am I at judging how well I understood what I was being asked to do? How can I focus on the meaning and significance of this new information? There are a lot of sub-questions under each question, usually as well. Have I considered all of my options for completing and expressing my response to the task, right? Do I have to write it, or can I do it in another way? So download this document and save it as a template, edit it, change it, do whatever you want with it. Answer those questions in writing or in video or audio, or through writing a scene or creating a movement piece, whatever works best for you. Here are the references for most of the references for the theoretical backgrounds from which I'm drawing that support all of this. This is all evidence-based theory about critical self-reflection. So that's it for me, and good luck and enjoy.